Hi there. In this lecture we see an amazing game between Stockfish Dev 16 and Leela 0, a very new version of it, relative to the time of this recording. So this is in the 2022 TSEC Season 23, Round 4. So the time control is 120 minutes with 12-second increments. So Stockfish is playing with the white pieces, and the first 10 moves, up to move 10 by white, they are all book moves. So we're in the Slav defensively, Slav accepted variation. So we have knight a6 here. This logically tries to use the b4 square, which white has weakened. It's a pretty standard looking variation. Bishop g4, bishop takes c4, e6. Bishop e3, knight b4. Now, black doesn't have a bad bishop. In fact, this bishop looks to be quite annoying when it comes to g6. So this is all in book up till here. And the first move Stockfish plays on its own is h3. We have now bishop g6. So both sides are now thinking about this. So the pawn is protected on e4. We have bishop e7. And now both sides castle, f4, h6. And this looks already quite aggressive for white. But what is incredible here is that this next move looks a little bit crazy and breaks the common rule in like human chess not to move pawns around your king. So can you guess? I think I've given a clue there for 10 points. Yeah, this move g4. The thing is this vacuum of potential weaknesses actually exploitable here? Not particularly. Black's pieces are a little bit away from this vacuum, and one of the benefits would be to put the bishop in a really bad square. So we have a6, king h1, b5, and the bishop just drops back. White doesn't want to activate black's pieces here by taking on b5, so we have bishop h7, and now kind of blunting that h7 bishop. We have knight e8, knight f3. So white's really gaining space, and usually you'd look for the downsides in terms of weaknesses that are exploitable. But here, black doesn't seem to be in a position to exploit this vacuum. It seems well covered, basically. Rook g1, we have king h8, and it is a bit of a worry, this g5, but at the moment it seems black has enough pressure on f5. Queen f1, so white is not rushing for g5. We have f6, and now this is a concession of the g6 square. And with this concession, remarkable things are potentially happening, like getting a kind of form pawn on g6. If you imagine this is remarkable stuff in retrospect, which is happening here. And such a form pawn can represent a long-term advantage, even for endgames, even for rook and pawn endgames. If black plays rook c8, let's see if black can do without weakening g6. Then this g5 potential is very, very scary. And white can actually build up here with bishop f4. And here h4, build up. And then g5, and it looks too much to bear. This would be now threatening checkmate with queen g7. And here, white's actually getting an advantage of these two massive pawns in the center. So it's not even about mating the king here. This is just about a huge positional advantage with these center pawns. So that's a fascinating variation where f6 isn't played. Rook c8. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. So f6 is played, and now there is a concession. Knight h4, queen d7, b3, rook ac8, queen f3, and now knight f7. We have a takes b5, knight g5. The queen goes back to g2. C takes b5, and now knight g6 check. And you might think this is strange because the bishop was blocked in, but it's the trade-offs. We're getting a very dangerous kind of form pawn, thorn, on g6. We have now e5, d5, and the thing is about this position, and this is where the game gets magical. It looks as though what's going on with this knight on g5. So the spectators, were wondering, has Leela actually badly miscalculated this? And the evaluation difference between both engines started to be absolutely massive. Like Stockfish more than 5, and Leela, didn't really see there was much of a problem with the position, about 1 or something, or less than 1 disadvantage. So bishop c5 was played. Bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, and now h4. And the way that black escapes this knight being trapped is to attack this knight on c3. So queen c8 is played. This is one of the only moves, really. If queen c7, then there's d6. And here, if queen takes d6, then we're just taking on g5. Thanks very much. And that's pretty problematic. That's going to be winning material. So, okay, and there's king safety issues as well. Even if c3 drops, there's now huge king safety issues. So black really can't afford such a distraction of queen takes d6. And if queen c8, we can see that this position is fascinating. There's d7 now, and here this position. So material balance in terms of pieces are restored, but g takes f6. And this is a huge problem with a pawn on d7. The rook couldn't take because of d8. And we see here that after g5, king safety becomes a major issue for black. This position with rook d8, rook c1 turns into a winning endgame though. Bishop g4 for rook c8 as example. So it's fascinating. Queen c8 seems to be one of the only moves to stay on board, but Stockfish already thinks that Leela is busted here. It's like more than +5 on the evaluation. So what on earth is going on? So h takes g5, rook takes c3. So why is this such a strong position? And this is one of the bits of magic which is frequently seen in these games. It's like no one has any real clue. Why would this be like so big for this position? This next move is unbelievably strong, and it's difficult to really, from a human point of view, even see what it's doing. Can you guess what this move is for 100 points? Okay, so a quiet move here, just rook cf1. And the threat here is actually queen h2. That's one of the big threats, which looks at e5 sometimes, as well as puts pressure on h6. So knight d3 is played. So there's magical stuff going on here. If f takes g5, I assumed it was something to do with rook f7, but there's something actually more concrete and forcing here, which is fascinating. How tempo gaining moves establish strategy, establish authority on a file. What would you do here for 100 points? We can actually establish authority on this f file, because black has this construction on the c file, these queenside pieces, but actually white plays rook takes f8 here. So after queen takes f8, rook f1, and this position, queen f2 now threatens with that fawn pawn, threatens a mating with queen f8. So fawn pawn magic. If rook c8, white takes control of the position, funny enough, after queen b6. This position with queen e6 and queen f5, white has control over the position, and that knight's kind of stranded. White's threatening things like d6 and d7. If rook d8, rook c1, white takes control of the c file, and this becomes an extremely dominant position. For example, here, black's falling apart. This is just one example. So here, for example, and black's in big trouble. White's just crashing through. For example, this position, white's pinning the queen. And if h takes g5, then there's a simple mating idea, queen h2 check, and mating on h7. If a5 is an example, then there's queen h2. And for example here, a4, g takes h6. A takes, h takes g7, this is just mating. So yeah, fascinating stuff to do with the power of this move, rook cf1. Absolutely fascinating how white can take control of the position from here if f takes g5. So it seems Leela might have seen a lot of this, and knight d3 was played. We have g takes h6, g takes h6, and now bishop takes d3, rook takes d3, rook c1. And this is a fascinating position as well. Is white's actual intention now to get authority on the c file? And why did Leela relinquish the c file with queen d7? It turns out here, rook c3, there might be a natural inclination here as a human to play queen d2, but it would fail miserably. Queen h2 is the point. If queen d2, the thing is, rook h3 is not just annoying, it's winning for black. King g2, queen takes g4 check, rook f3 check, rook takes f2, and black's got a huge advantage. So yes, after rook c3, queen d2 is out of the question. It neglects that h3 square, weakness of the last move, basically. So we have actually, in this position, in this variation, if this had been played, the move would actually be queen h2. So there's a mate threat, mating. So if king g7, because if rook takes c1, just to put the mate on the board, queen takes h6 check, and queen h7 is mating. So king g7, The thing is, the funny thing about this position is that this is actually turns out to be an unprotected piece. It's on the same colour as the king. Guess what white would play here, which is a remarkable resource, which exposes this as a major downside liability, the c3 rook. Yeah, there's a crushing resource here in the form of g5. Just for the record, also in this position, you might be wondering about rook h3. Here, g takes f6 check. So if rook takes, we're just taking on c8. Thanks very much. We're going to be a rook up after rook takes h2. King takes h2, just a rook up. So what does black do here? If the king's brought out to f6, actually in this position, g7 is winning. Funny enough. This is the absolute best move in the position. Absolute optimal. There's also rook takes c8. Just for the record, let's look at rook takes c8 first, because this is interesting as well, just from an endgame perspective. d6 here ties black down. Black can't take on g7 without running into d7 after. And here, rook g6 check, and say we don't want a repetition, we just play king h3, and this position is just in time for winning the endgame. So here, b4 locks down 2 pawns, locked down by 1, and white's just in time here to sort out all the issues. The king can make its way to the queen side, and black has to submit really to losing e3, and that's a lost position there. But otherwise, you know, the rook could sacrifice itself and then white would win those 2 pawns. There's no way of black escaping fate here. So yes, e2 is just too slow. The king would just munch the pawns. You know, after king d2 and trying to queen, the king would just be herding this pawn forward after. So even that route with rook takes c8 is winning, but the actual strongest is g7 here. And on rook takes, this position is absolutely winning here for g8. It's very simple win. And if rook g8, yeah, rook takes c8, rook takes here is again, it's just simple wins here, basically. So essentially, it's fascinating, but rook h3 doesn't do any favors for black here in this scenario. If f takes g5 as an example, then queen takes e5 check and taking out c3. If king g8, g7, and this position, for example, g takes f8, this is crashing through for white for a big advantage. In this queen ending, white will be winning. So d7 here, this is just a winning endgame. For example, this position is going to be absolutely winning. So it's absolutely fascinating, the variations after rook c3, queen h2. Absolutely fascinating. So yes. Okay, so let's go back. So queen d7, which seems to give up the c file. So we have actually queen f1 first before doing anything else, offering a pawn on b3, very dynamic. And it means queen f5, so that was a double attack for the rook and to get into f5. So at the moment, this is a pawn down for Stockfish, but this is now a reinforced, protected passed pawn. And this is also a passed pawn, so there's 2 major passed pawns here. King g8, rook c7, b4, and it looks as though there's 2 problems, not just this passed pawn, but white could potentially double rooks on the on the 7th rank and checkmate the king. We have a5, rook b7, and now rook c3 is played. If a4, we just double the rooks here as example. And the thing is about this position here, how would you win from this position? Is it that easy? There's a crushing move here, which is d6. So the point is, the rook would be pinned if taking, then we're just mating after, you know, the delay. And if a3, this position, check, rook e7 threatens checkmate here with rook h8. And if rook takes d6, g7 check is winning for g8 queening. Fascinating stuff. So, okay, rook c3 is tried, rook takes c3, b takes, but now the only move is played at move 43, which establishes an absolutely winning advantage. There's a saying that all rook and pawn endings are drawn, but not this one after this next move. Can you see what this next move is? It's a logical looking move. Yeah, rook c7. Just get rid of that dangerous pawn first and just be benefiting from the protected pass pawns in the position. So we have a4. If d6, by the way, just to show this is not really doing anything, rook d8, and then it will just be a draw by perpetual. So yeah, rook c7, we have a4, rook takes c3, and now rook b8. If rook a8, as example, rook a3, and the king can just come up the board here, this is too much to bear. This is just plainly hopeless for black. And if the king tried to go over here, this is also just plainly hopeless. It's far too slow, black's passed pawn. We're just queening there as white, and that's easy. So yes, it seems a hopeless rook and pawn ending here. So rook b8 is tried, rook c6, rook a8, rook a8, d6, rook d8. Yes, this is far too slow, a3, because of d7, and that hook square of the pawn is very useful for rook c8. So that's winning a key tempo here. Rook c8 check, and then rook takes a8 just in time to catch the pawn. So rook d8 is played. We have rook a6, a3, king g2, a2. Rook takes a2, rook takes d6, and perhaps this is what Stockfish had in mind all of that time long ago when the humans thought white was just winning a piece, which makes these games absolutely like sci-fi, that the whole strategy after the opening to install the form pawn is actually leading to this winning endgame position. So rook a8 check, king g7, rook a7 check, king h8, and now rook f7, and black is totally tied up here. Black cannot possibly allow two connected passed pawns here by letting f6 go. We have rook a6 clinging on to f6. If rook d4 as example, rook takes f6, and in here rook e6, rook e7 check is easily winning because we push the king aside and queen. And instead of king f6, if king f8, g7 check is nice, and then f6, and then we're going to get in rook e8 check, rook f8 check to push the king aside to queen, easily winning. Fascinating stuff. So rook a6 is played. We have king h3, and the king can just leisurely walk. There's one of many winning ideas here for white. The king can just take a walk to win the h-pawn. So this is entirely hopeless. And as someone pointed out, rook h7 check is also winning. This position is also winning, actually, because if we get this position, it's still a winning ending. But king h4 is perhaps, it seems the most accurate, as that was what was played. So this position, king g5, it's now forced mate in 7 here. We have rook g4 check, king h6. So not caring about black's pawn, that's shielding the king from checks. So the threat here is rook f8, checkmate. King g8, rook e6. So this is absolutely crushing, threatening rook e8, checkmate. So the king moves, but now f6, it's all over. So king h7, rook a7 check, g7 check, rook takes, g7, f takes, end of game. So the game continued, f7, g8, queen, and checkmate here. What a game. These games are absolutely amazing. So what tactics and strategy did we learn from this game? Well, from the opening, it seems this is an annoying variation, for human chess especially, that perhaps our first thought is not to play g4 coming up here. Why on earth would you want to play g4? But it seems as though concessions are being made by black. When we have that pawn on g6 soon with this build-up, the concession of f6 leads to a form pawn because of the way white is threatening after installing the form pawn to play g5 next. So this situation, as well as that knight kind of stranded, but we have a situation here which is very, very dangerous. So yeah, absolutely fascinating stuff, how what seems to be a clear case of winning a piece was a more complicated story, which was why perhaps Leela thought the evaluation wasn't that bad. Leela didn't really realize it was losing deep into an endgame because of this issue, which kind of forced issues about countering on c3, which kind of forced issues about simplification and very dodgy endgames, very losing endgames. So absolutely fascinating. This exchange knight for knight leading into essentially, transforming it into more simplified losing positions here. So, and this way of using the c-file here, fascinating stuff on rook c3 behind the scenes with queen h2. Absolutely fascinating for g5. So yes, absolutely fascinating position here. Okay, so a real, treat of a game in the variations as well as the main line of the game. So queen d7, and then getting into this essentially winning rook and pawn ending. So not all rook and pawn endings are drawn. Was that the Tarish kind of maxim quotation, perhaps? So yeah, this is an absolutely winning rook and pawn ending, and with that protected passed pawn, this is a major asset in the position. So yes, this is very, very difficult for black. The king's restricted. This king is more active. So this is what makes this an absolutely dominating, terribly dominating endgame position to win from in multiple ways. So a fascinating game here in round 4. A lot to learn, which kind of overtakes human strategies and tactics, really, for how to transition middle game advantages into winning endgames. Okay. Thanks very much. All comments, questions, likes and subscribes really appreciated. Thanks so much.